This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. Hispanic leader Cristobal Alex says the road to the White House will go through the Latino community. And right now, Hillary Clinton is far ahead. Food expert Robert Paarlberg says the poor do have access to grocery stores, but they don't have time to fix meals. And Bill Press talks with Move-On leader Ben Wikler about the group's endorsement of Bernie Sanders. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Cristobal Alex heads a new Latino political group, and he says his community will determine who the next president is. And we say hello to Cristobal Alex, the president of the Latino Victory Project and the Latino Victory Foundation, an effort to build Latino political power so that the faces and voices of Latinos are reflected at every level of government and policymaking. Cristobal Alex, thank you very much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thank you so much for reaching out to us. We're excited to talk to you.
Well, we're very happy to have you with us. Your organization is fairly new on the political scene. What is the aim of the Latino Victory Project?
We are about a year and a half old now. We launched May of 2014. Our co-founders are Eva Longoria and Henry Munoz, and we launched the organization for the purpose of building Latino political power. We don't have, until now, an Emily's List for Latinos or a gay and lesbian victory fund for Latinos. Very sustained, intentional national effort to make sure that our voices are heard. And the way we do that is by helping elect Latinos up and down the ballot to office, by making sure we build a pipeline of Latino donors so we can sustain our movement for change. And then finally, just making sure that our voices are heard on Election Day and in the big policy fights beyond Election Day.
Is Hillary Clinton the overwhelming choice of Latino voters, and should she be?
What we've seen so far are strong indications that Latinos favor Hillary Clinton. Part of that has to do with her positions on issues that matter most to Latinos and to our community, issues including immigration, the environment, healthcare, the economy. She's also made some very strong staff decisions, elevating prominent members of the Latino community into her staff, including dreamers and others that have played a influential role. That's not to say that the two other Democratic candidates haven't done a great job. They too have hired wonderful and strong leaders from our community, and their policy positions are not that different on the issues that matter most to our community. Polls, though, show that Hillary is the favorite at this point.
Mm-hmm. Now, is there a danger, though, from your viewpoint, that the Democratic nominee might take the Latino vote for granted?
Well, we certainly hope that the Latino vote is not taken for granted. What we know, based on electoral math and on years of growing our share of the electorate, the White House is really going to be decided by the Latino vote, and the road to the White House will go through our community. And I think what we're seeing are, at least on the Democratic side, the campaigns looking to very aggressively court and to work within the Latino community to capture their vote and capture their trust. If you look, for example, the very first campaign event that Hillary Clinton did was in Nevada, in Las Vegas, with Dreamers and other Latino immigrants. If you look at the positions that Bernie Sanders has taken, or even, and sometimes especially, Martin O'Malley elevating immigration and his work to champion Dreamers. So I don't think that will happen, that they'll be taken for granted, and certainly if folks look at the electoral math, that would be a real problem if they did.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. We're speaking with Cristobal Alex, president of the Latino Victory Project and the Latino Victory Foundation. Cristobal, how do you explain that a Republican Party that has so many positions that harm minorities also has 2 Latino presidential candidates and a couple of minority female governors and an African-American U.S. senator.
Well, I've got to be honest. The Republican Party has done a really good job of spotlighting candidates of color, of elevating candidates of color within the party, of clearing the field for candidates of color, of really investing in those candidates and in that pipeline. On the progressive side or on the Democratic side, it might be argued persuasively that they have not done as much and haven't focused on that as much as the Republicans have. Now, just because you have a Republican candidate who happens to be Latino or African American or a person of color doesn't necessarily mean that they reflect the values of those communities. And so what we're seeing here is particularly very recently with some of the Latino presidential candidates speaking out against the issues that matter most to Latinos, a real problem for the Republicans. They can do a good job of elevating folks, spotlighting folks, investing in folks, but then when it comes down to the issues, they're simply wrong on the issues and are on the wrong side of history in so many of these cases.
Do you think that Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio are traitors to the interests and causes of Latino Americans?
You know, I don't like to use the word traitor. I know some very prominent members of the Latino community have said that. What we've said is that these 2 gentlemen who come from immigrant families, who really have had all of the benefits to achieve greatness and climb towards the American dream, have completely turned their backs on their communities. If you look at positions on immigration, if you look at positions on healthcare, on the economy, on a number of issues, they are simply so far to the right and so extreme that they will have a very, very hard time securing Latino voters because they don't reflect the values of Latino voters.
Do you get a sense that they've forgotten their own roots? Because that's what happens to me. I look at both of them, both Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, and think you're almost forgetting where you come from. You know, you're forgetting your own background.
Yeah, I wonder if that's it. Here's the thing. Part of it might be that they forget where they come from. I hope that's not the case, but that might be the case. What could be the case, and perhaps it's more nefarious, is they simply made a political calculation. The political calculation was to throw their community under the bus for their own benefit. The way I look at it is, for so many in the community, when we climb to the top of the ladder, we reach back to try to pull up the person behind us. That's how America should work. That's how our community for generations has operated. And now you have these 2 who have climbed to the top of the ladder and are really what they're doing is kicking down the ladder so that the rest of the community can achieve milestones that they've achieved. And it sends me, to be perfectly honest, that we have this great opportunity to grow the Latino electorate, to expand our political influence, and then 2 folks on the top of the Republican ticket that are simply attacking our community, to put it bluntly. As
if they're playing a child's King of the Hill type of game or something. It's mind-boggling.
Exactly.
Yeah. We're speaking with Cristobal Alex, president of the Latino Victory Project and the Latino Victory Foundation. All right. The positions of Donald Trump and the rest of the Republican field. Will this permanently destroy any chance for the GOP to attract Latino voters?
Well, here's the thing. Donald Trump, on day one, built and launched his entire campaign by attacking us, calling us rapists, thieves, criminals, and since then has attacked a number of other groups. The opposite of what the so-called Republican autopsy in 2012 said. It said that they needed to be more welcoming. It said they needed to work to advance immigration reform if they wanted to have any chance in the future because the demographics in this country are changing so quickly. Certainly Donald Trump, if he read that or not, has disregarded it and has definitely damaged the brand in a significant way with Latinos. There's another side to that story, though, from my perspective, which is Donald Trump provides us a unique opportunity to organize, to mobilize, and to engage Latinos and other immigrant communities that we simply haven't had in many years. I like to say that he is among the very best organizers of all time. You've got Pete Wilson in California, who pushed through Prop 187, the first anti-immigrant ballot initiative. You've got Sheriff Joe Arpaio in Arizona, and now you've got Donald Trump. Those are the top three Latino organizers, and we've got to use this this demagoguery, this hatred that he has for our community against him and against others that would attack us.
Getting people out that might not otherwise stand up and have something to say. That's
Exactly.
Essentially what he's doing. Yeah. Now, beyond immigration, what are some issues that are high on the agenda for the Latino Victory Project?
Well, when we think about our candidates, the thing we look at is not party affiliation. We try to stay away from labels. What matters most to our community are Latino values, which are American values. We care about economic opportunity, and part of that, of course, means a minimum wage that would lift 11 million Latinos out of poverty. It means a clean and safe environment. A lot of folks don't know this, but Latinos score higher than any demographic when it comes to the environment. 9 out of 10 Latinos want to see some action to curb climate change. When we think about immigration, obviously that's a primary issue for us. It's a line in the sand for us. It's something that we work on consistently, and it's how we look. It's a lens through which we look at many candidates. The last thing I'll say is, of course, healthcare is critically important to our community, as it is to all Americans, and those core issues are at the top of our list when we look at candidates. We're also looking over the next hill, though. We know 2016 will be a seminal year, but we want to be prepared for the transition. We want to be prepared to get the right appointments in there. And we also want to celebrate, we hope, some really key victories this year, including, hopefully, electing the very first Latina to the United States Senate. If you can believe it, 55 million Americans in this country, 17% of the population, and we've never once had a Latina U.S. Senator.
It leaves us shaking our heads, or if it doesn't, it should. Cristobal Alex, the president of the Latino Victory Project and the Latino Victory Foundation, joining us today here on americasdemocrats.org. Cristobal, thank you very much for your time. We do look forward to having you back again with us soon.
Really appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you. You too. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. Harvard professor Robert Paarlberg is an expert on food policy and explains why America is so fat. More on that in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
As a raker of muck, it's my job to root out the nefarious doings and innate immorality of the corporate creature. But I'm in danger these days of being rendered obsolete by what's become the ordinariness of corporate nefariousness. The wrongdoings of major corporations and entire industries are now so commonplace that one hardly has to root them out. Their uglies are constantly oozing to the surface on their own from today's fetid corporate swamp. What's happened is that a profiteering imperative has taken hold of the executive suites. Not content with merely making a profit, CEOs are out to make a killing, no matter what it costs the rest of us. This has turned them into rank thieves, richly rewarded for routinely exploiting America's workforce, plundering the environment, and corrupting our governments. Top executives have also seen that they'll pay no personal price for rapacious behavior, since the corrupted political and judicial systems show no serious interest in prosecuting, much less punishing, perpetrators who get caught. In recent months, 2 huge examples of this rampant crime spree have erupted. One, after Big Pharma bought out several reasonably priced medicines from independent drug makers, the avaricious giants immediately gouged unsuspecting patients by quadrupling their prices. And 2, Volkswagen joined the Automobile Hall of Shame by secretly rigging computers on its highly advertised green vehicles to hide the fact that they actually spew horrendous amounts of pollution into Earth's atmosphere. This is Jim Hightower saying, an ethos of anything goes now rules the top floor suites of most major corporations. The use of blatant lies, PR cover-ups, and zero top-level accountability is now central to the corporate business model. They don't care if they get caught. Profit has taken ethics prisoner, and corporate elites now call the devil partner.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Contrary to common belief, poor people in urban areas do have access to healthy food, but they don't have the time to prepare it, says Professor Robert Paarlberg. And we say hello to Robert Paarlberg, an adjunct professor of public policy at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. He is an expert on global food and agricultural policy, and last talked with us about his book, Food Politics, What Everyone Needs to Know. His new book is titled The United States of Excess, Gluttony, and the Dark Side of American Exceptionalism. Robert Paarlberg, thanks very much for joining us again on americasdemocrats.org.
Thanks. It's good to talk to you.
You as well. In a recent article, you took on obesity as a public health issue. And pardon the pun, but isn't this a losing battle?
Well, it's a losing battle for many individuals. That's certainly the case. But it's a battle that won't leave us alone as a society. We've just learned from the CDC, that's the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta, that our national obesity rate continues to go up. It's up from 35% 3 years ago to 38% today. And this shocked most people in the health community. They were hoping that we had at least stopped the increase. It turns out we haven't stopped the increase. So what we're doing now is obviously inadequate.
You suggest taxing and regulating junk food like they do in Europe. What's the evidence that works?
Well, it's been hard to get evidence to demonstrate that. If you compare the United States and Europe, it's a difficult comparison because the price of all food in Europe has been about 30% higher than in the United States for a long time. And this goes a long way to explaining why obesity rates in Europe are only about half as high as our own. But a specific test for the value of taxes on sugary soda and junk food, probably the best thing we now have is the impact of a soda tax that was set in place in Mexico in 2014. It was a 1 peso per liter soda tax, and we've now learned 1 year later that because of this tax, soda sales overall have declined by 12%, and water sales have increased by 4%. So that's a healthy switch. And we've also learned that soda sales to the poorest category of Mexicans declined by 17%. Now, it's important to know how to read that statistic. What that means is these poor Mexicans, well, they weren't losing any money. They were spending 17% less buying soda. They were saving their money for healthier food choices. So I think the evidence from Mexico is generally it reinforces the message that we shouldn't be afraid of targeted taxes on things like soda and junk food.
Well, moves made similarly in New York, taxing sugary products. There was a backlash from minority groups. What was their agenda, and how do you respond to that?
Yeah, there was a backlash, and one problem is that Mayor Bloomberg was never the right person to be leading this fight. It looked too much like rich white people in Manhattan who don't drink any sugary beverages anyway, trying to tell people in the Bronx what kind of lifestyle to choose. But of course, it was more complicated than that. Soft drink companies have long developed close relationships with minority communities, like the Coca-Cola Company in Atlanta gives money to the NAACP in Atlanta. So to some extent, the minority communities had been compromised by money that they'd accepted from beverage companies. And yet the cultural resistance in minority communities to health measures that even single them out indirectly, that cultural resistance is significant.
We're speaking with Robert Paarlberg, adjunct professor of public policy at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. And his new book is titled The United States of Excess, Gluttony, and the Dark Side of American Exceptionalism. Talk to us a little bit about the existence of food ghettos, where residents of urban areas have worse nutritional choices in grocery stores and restaurants.
Well, the research on this is fascinating. For a long time, we thought the urban poor ate less well because they didn't have access to supermarkets. They lived in what some people called food deserts. But then research started to emerge showing that, in fact, they did have access to supermarkets. They weren't living in food deserts. They were more or less living in food swamps surrounded by too many fast food restaurants and convenience stores. Poor communities have twice as many fast food restaurants and convenience stores. Access to supermarkets existed for most of these residents. In fact, more than 98% of Americans either live within 1 mile of a supermarket or they have access to an automobile to drive to a supermarket. The problem for the poorest urban-dwelling Americans was that they didn't really have as much time to prepare healthy meals from whole foods and from fresh produce. This is especially the case for single-parent families where time is almost as scarce as money. So these families tend to food shop for convenience in preparation and cleanup as much as for health or for cost. And that's why there are so many convenience stores and fast food restaurants locating in these neighborhoods.
That's a very interesting take, because I'd never even thought of it from that standpoint. So you've got somebody who's working 2 or 3 jobs. They just can't take the time to prepare a nice healthy meal, and so they opt for the fast food or the convenience store.
Absolutely. If you're coming home at the end of the day and if there are 2 kids waiting for you at home, do you stop at a supermarket and shop and then prepare a meal and then clean up afterwards?
Yeah.
Or do you just stop and get a bucket of chicken and save more time to be with your family and more time for yourself at the end of a long, busy day?
Sure.
People are driven into making choices that aren't the best for their health or for the health of their children.
Now, the government has made great pains with public service campaigns on smoking, seatbelts, sexual abuse. Why can't that work for obesity?
Well, there are some big differences between smoking, for example, and excess eating. I could mention several of them. First, and this is probably most important, even 50 years ago, in America, not everybody smoked. Smoking, a little bit like alcohol, was in our Anglo-Protestant culture considered to be vaguely sinful, and many people didn't do it at all. The fact that it had a vaguely sinful connotation also made it easier to pass laws restricting things like smoking and alcohol. You can't do that with food. Many faith traditions in the United States actually organize their social activities around an abundance of obesity-generating food. So there were cultural differences. Also, it's possible to quit smoking completely. But when it comes to eating, you're up against a trickier proposition. You have to maintain moderation. That's much more difficult than stopping completely.
Right.
And with smoking, there were risks from secondhand smoke that gave everyone an interest in the issue. But there are no secondhand risks from somebody else overeating next to you. And also with smoking, there was really nothing wrong with isolating people who wanted to smoke or even shaming them a bit for wanting to smoke. But with obesity, some people are genetically predisposed to be heavy. So it would actually be a terrible social injustice to single such people out for shame. And I think it's for good reason that we don't engage in shaming campaigns against people who are heavy. You never know to what extent it's a result of choices they make and to what extent it's a result of a genetic predisposition.
Right. Two people eating the exact same amount of food, one's metabolic system may be much different from the other, and therefore you have two different results, and so you can't very well.
Absolutely true.
On the other side of this, are we as a society too obsessed with thinness? Skinny isn't healthy either, is it?
I agree with you completely there. Here it's somewhat hard to recall, but back when most people were thin, it was considered a sign of health and wealth, and even a marker for leisure, to be a little bit plump. Well, now that everybody can be plump, we tend to make a fetish out of being thin. And it, as you mentioned, it's actually more dangerous medically to be underweight than to be a little bit overweight. And even being obese by itself doesn't automatically push you into danger. 20% of all obese people have completely normal metabolic signatures. The most serious health risks from obesity don't come when you become obese with a body mass index above 30. They start to come when you have a body mass index above 35. And obsessions with thinness can be dangerous. Of course, they lead to harmful eating disorders and also to billions of dollars spent on diet and exercise products that usually fail to deliver any durable benefit. So you're exactly right. We have to worry about going too far in the other direction.
And we just have to find some sort of balance, and that sounds like that's a lot more difficult than you might think at first.
Yeah, balance is always more difficult than going to an extreme.
Absolutely. Robert Paarlberg, adjunct professor of public policy at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. His new book is titled The United States of Excess, Gluttony, and the Dark Side of American Exceptionalism. Robert, thank you so much for your time with us today on americasdemocrats.org. We do look forward to having you back again soon.
Great. Thank you very much.
You're quite welcome. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now Bill Press talks with Ben Wikler of Move-On about the group's endorsement of Bernie Sanders.
Right now we're talking Democratic Party politics, Democratic primary politics, with a huge endorsement by MoveOn.org for Senator Bernie Sanders yesterday, and Ben Wikler, who runs the Washington office of MoveOn.org, here in studio with us. Your first move here was to try to convince Elizabeth Warren to run.
That's right. So let's go back in our time machine to December of 2014. Is that right? No. Is that right?
Yes.
2014. Man, yes. It feels like a long time ago.
I know. Right.
Oof. All right.
We got started too damn early in this race.
Yeah, we really did. Well, at that time, there was this interesting thing. The Clinton campaign, advisors had been saying to reporters that it was unclear. I think they were saying she was going to run against Washington gridlock. That was going to be the theme of her campaign, which is basically like saying, I'm going to run as a David Broder bipartisan, let's rise above the fray kind of person, as opposed to a progressive fighter or what have you. And MoveOn members, we were polling, and what we were finding among our membership is that they didn't have a favorite candidate in the race. They felt like it was too early. But the idea of Elizabeth Warren running set them on fire. There was just an extraordinary response. And Elizabeth Warren was such a kind of magnetic center for progressive politics. This is an anecdote that still blows my mind. In 2012, when she was running for Senate, if we wanted to raise money for a Democratic senator with an email, other than Elizabeth Warren, for a Senate candidate, the best way to do it was to have a message from Elizabeth Warren.
Oh, no kidding, really?
Yeah. I mean, it was like she was
the ticket.
She was the ticket. So MoveOn launched. We asked our members, and we launched a campaign called Run Warren Run, asking her.
Oh, I remember well.
Yeah. And
look behind you there.
There we go. I'm from the Elizabeth Warren wing of the Democratic Party, there behind me. And tons of people got involved. We wound up actually hiring whole field teams in Iowa and New Hampshire to build the first field campaigns, grassroots campaigns for her. And she started going up in the polls, but she kept not running for president. So, it wound up being this thing where we felt like the national discussion moved rapidly towards her in terms of the agenda that both parties were confronting. There was this period of time, it's hard to remember now, when all the Republican campaigns were talking about inequality.
Yes.
You remember that?
Oh, yeah. Oh,
yeah.
No.
Rubio, Bush.
Yeah. That
was before the Trump era. But even when Trump launched, he was actually talking about inequality a lot more than he does now.
Going to raise taxes on the millionaires and billionaires, right?
Absolutely. So there was this moment when Warren really, I think in part thanks to the demonstrated...
When did you finally give up on her?
I think it was a week or two after Sanders launched his campaign, and she had, just declined. Then at that point, we could sort of feel the energy in the grassroots shifting. So at that point, we put it on hold. And I have to say, the Sanders campaign wound up hiring a whole bunch of the field staff that we had organized in Iowa and New Hampshire. So there was a sense in which a bunch of the team wound up moving from the Draft Warren movement directly into Sanders' campaign.
2 questions. Do you think she regrets not running now, given how well Bernie is doing? And if Bernie were to win Iowa and New Hampshire, do you think she might? I saw a story this morning saying people are saying it's not too late, Elizabeth.
I can't speak for what is happening inside her mind or her world. I think she's incredibly brilliant person and has her own reasons for making the decisions that she did. And I think for anyone to run for president is an extraordinary thing. So I respect whatever led to her coming down where she did.
What is your answer to what I hear from a lot of, let's say, establishment Democrats, right? Good people who their primary goal is to keep the White House they want to get the Senate too, keep the White House in Democratic hands, who say across the board Bernie could never win a national election.
First of all, I think all progressives would share the goal of keeping the White House. So everyone's on the same page on that.
Right.
The second thing is, that group of people just has been wrong over and over about Sanders. And at this point, they don't have a lot of credibility left in the Sanders prognostication department, or the Trump prognostication department, or whether this will be a contested primary prognostication department. I mean, all of these assumptions that came in this year to this presidential race have been completely dashed. This was supposed to be
proven wrong.
Then in all the political science literature that, said the party decides, this is going to be a Clinton versus Bush contest, it just hasn't actually happened that way. So I don't actually put a lot of stock in that kind of information. I think, poll objective measures of grassroots support are probably the best thermometer that we have. And one thing that I have to say I've been really impressed by is how Sanders fares in national matchups against the possible Republican nominees. This is not, what anyone in D.C. would have predicted a year ago.
No, he does very well, and in some cases he did better than Hillary against Trump and against Cruz.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Cristobal Alex, Robert Paarlberg, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us, support the show, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate.